Low and throttle up.
Five, four, three, two, one, zero. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
Welcome to Fort Worth Esoteric Masonic Podcast, where we wade into the deep end of the pool for the more spiritually minded Mason.
Nice to be in orbit.
The statements of our guest and host do not represent the stance of any lodge or Grand Lodge.
All right, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in again to the Fort Worth Masonic Podcast. We are always happy to have you guys listen. And I think you will all be very interested by our guest today and have a lot to learn from him. I am Gabe Yagish, and I am a past master and the current marshal of Fort Worth Lodge.
I'm Billy Hamilton, a past master of Fort Worth 148 Lodge.
And we have a special guest today.
Ben Williams. I'm a past master of Telluride and Norwood Lodges on the western slope of Colorado, but actually beaming in from Denver currently.
Ah, okay. Perfect. All right. Yes. So Ben has listeners. Ben has many accolades, but today we're going to talk with him about some of his most interesting projects within Masonry, and we're going to start off with a personal profile. Billy, take it away.
Ben, if you would, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself outside of the Masonic lens. Who is Ben Williams non-Masonically?
Yeah, the normal human being.
So, yeah, okay. Well, I guess, in the civilian world, I am a registered patent attorney now, living in Denver. I'm married, have one daughter called Adeline, and we have a beagle. I live in Littleton, Colorado, having moved here back in 2012 from the Western Slope, which is where I first became a Mason. I was born in Washington, D.C., oddly, despite the accent. My mother was English, my father was American. Theirs was something of a kind of arranged marriage. It wasn't, formally an arranged marriage, but it was kind of, they were kind of put together. And my dad fell in love with my mom and sort of wrote to her profusely, and she fell in love with his letters, and they got married. And suffice it to say, it didn't last longer than 2 sons. And shortly after my birth, my mom left my dad and moved to England and took my brother and I with her. I have no recollection of them actually ever really being together. So I kind of grew up in 2 worlds, one on the other side of the Atlantic, and then I'd visit my dad twice a year, come for, the Christmas holidays and spend a couple of weeks in summer in the US. Ultimately moved here in 1995. I'd always promised my father I'd attend college or some schooling here. So I came here to go to university and never left. This is the great country, right? So ended up in Colorado through a bunch of haphazard events that were completely unplanned, and fell in love with the state and never left. I think I moved here in 2001, 2002. Yeah, it was 2002, summer of 2002. And I've been in Colorado ever since.
Fantastic. It's awesome how life gets a hold of you sometimes.
Right? It seems to have plans for us. What is it? The best laid plans of mice and men, right? Galactic. But anyway, yeah, so in a nutshell, that's kind of it. If I can talk more about, kind of what I do. I think most of the time I'm just plugged into a computer, reading patents and writing patents. That's what I do for a living. I author and prosecute patent applications for corporate and individual inventors at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Oh, wow. So I spend much of my time invested in legalese.
And you said that when we were talking before starting the recording, you said that you were recently still in law school, and this is now kind of a new phase of life for you, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So in 2000 and 12, I passed the patent bar, the patent registration exam, which is a different sort of qualification. Since actually the Constitution, the right for patent protection is in the Constitution, is a constitutional right. And even since the earliest days of the United States, patent agents have been able to practice law without being lawyers themselves. And I think simply because most of the folks who come to the patent bar, if you will, have a scientific and technical background, whereas the majority of lawyers who come to the bar do so through the social sciences and English and history and the like. So a lot of attorneys are not actually eligible to sit the patent registration exam. So as a result, non-lawyers have been able to practice law in the administrative setting of the United States Patent and Trademark Office and elsewhere, like the United States Trade Commission and such. I put myself through law school over the last 4 years recently for a number of different reasons. I mean, I don't want to get too technical, but a main one is the patent agent client privilege. While it's meant to be as extensive as the attorney client privilege, has not really been tested sufficiently and consistently upheld across the various jurisdictions to sort of give that added level of protection to discussing inventions, especially, unfortunately, patent litigation is incredibly expensive. And so any patent that is written, it should be written in the shadow of litigation. And a patent agent is more susceptible to the attacks of litigation teams seeking to invalidate patents and compel disclosure of what would otherwise be confidential information. So that was one reason. And secondly, I was just tired of having that conversation about, I'm not an attorney, I'm a patent agent, and, going through all that stuff. So sure. I did sit the bar in February, the California bar. I went to school in California. I went to law school online. It was a way to get a cheap law degree without being terribly in debt. In fact, that's what made me move to Denver, honestly. I moved here because I had aspirations to attend Denver University, get a scholarship perhaps if I was capable of it, and, move my practice here. The United States Patent and Trademark Office opened a satellite branch in Denver. I think it was in sometime around 2012 anyway. So it gave Denver and Silicon Valley and Detroit a presence in the patent game. In other words, it wasn't just Alexandria, Virginia, where you could go up and show up in person to make argument if you needed to. You could do it in Denver. So Denver in Colorado, as a result, has actually become something of an intellectual property hub. So it made sense. But lo and behold, even though I think I might have been able to score sufficiently on the LSATs to get a scholarship to DU, theirs is a lower admission standard than Boulder, for example, which are the only two ABA accredited law schools in Colorado. It turns out they don't give scholarships for night school. I'd have to go full time. And I wasn't really willing to give up my business, and go to law school. I'd have to take out massive loans and be $200,000 plus in debt. I know lawyers today that are in their late 30s and they're still paying off their student loans. So I was like, I just won't do it. I'll just keep going with the patent agency thing. I don't really need the law degree. I'm not going to go to court, right? I'm not looking for that kind of practice. But actually, a client of mine got sucked into an invalidity suit, which really changed the game. In fact, it was in pretrial of this insane lawsuit that I was involved in as the author of the patent in question. In pretrial, that I graduated law school with a Juris Doctorate. We went to trial in Monroe, Louisiana, in I think it was November, October, November time period. Actually, whenever that hurricane hit is when we were in there. It was just this really weird
Talk
event.
About bad timing.
Oh my God. And lead counsel was pregnant. And of course she had to fly away, and they induced the birth because of the low pressure, when the hurricanes come, babies are born.
Gosh.
And so it was a total mess. I mean, I thought I was just going to be ruined, for a number of reasons. I don't need the labor, but anyway, so finally got through all of that, thank God, and then sat the California bar exam in February. And I'm pleased to say I passed. I didn't think I was necessarily going to. I was recovering from COVID. I had terrible COVID headaches. And the worst part of it all is I had unfinished dental work going on in one of my teeth.
Oh,
so I had like a fake cap, for a crown on my back tooth there, on my upper left molar. And I was literally chewing up ibuprofen throughout the 2-day exam like M&Ms, just maximum dosing it the whole way through. And it was a really tough test. I mean, the California bar is notoriously difficult anyway, among the bar exams, which are also notoriously difficult. Right?
Yeah, my understanding is that it is the most difficult to pass out of all of the jurisdictions in the United States.
I think that's true, and this one was particularly difficult as well. The second section of multiple, what we call MBEs, the multi-state bar exam, the multiple choice questions, were incredibly difficult. So I wasn't convinced I passed. In fact, the pass rate was 33.9%, which is the second lowest bar pass rate in history. And the MBE section had the lowest pass rate. Well, tied lowest pass rate in history. So I don't know anyone else who passed the exam. None of the people I studied with, the guy sitting next to me, he was already admitted in New York as a tax attorney, and his firm had flown him out to, get California, because California they don't play nice with anybody, apparently. There's no reciprocity with any other jurisdiction. And even he failed. So I must have just squeaked by. But, unfortunately, it's more tricky than I realized to share recognition, to be admitted in Colorado. So I'm working on that presently. But anyway, that's what's going on in my life.
Wow. So I gotta ask, to put it very mildly, you are a very active Mason, and you have, you do Masonic publishing as well, and you are gainfully employed, and you were going through law school up until recently, and you're a family man, right? So these are all huge commitments, right? So how did you balance all of those? Because I'm listening to you give this breakdown, and in the back of my head I'm going, you're talking about law school. And in the back of my head, the entire time you were talking, I had this little voice in my head saying, and remember, he's doing all of this Masonically, and he's a family man, and he's got a job, and XYZ, right? How was that? What was that like?
It was terrible. I mean, it was really, really tough. I mean, we talked about that law school was going to be challenging. And, I went online, right? So it wasn't like a full-on law school experience. The education was certainly subpar. But, the reading that's required and the amount of homework regardless is just, I think I was doing 7 to 8 hours of lectures in the week for the first year, right? As well as having homework and discussion boards and essays and just incredible reading quantities. I mean, to be fair, I just couldn't keep up with all of the reading towards the end of it. I think part of law school is learning what you need to read and what you can sort of avoid, not reading. Nobody can read that amount unless they just want full immersion. But honestly, I pulled back out of a lot of Masonic stuff. I was much more active when I was single, living on the Western Slope. And there's, a lot of room out there. You can do as much Masonry as you desire. So by the time I moved here, I had this horrible situation where I was Grand Commander, Grand Orator, and also the Northwest Department Commander for an overlapping period of a couple of months. And that year was really, really tough. And it wasn't planned, right? Because I had staggered it, but as you probably know, I don't know how it is in Texas, but certainly out here, people drop out of line, and everything gets reshuffled. So again, your best laid plans, it just serves it to you all at once. So no, it was definitely difficult and definitely exhausting, and I wouldn't recommend it. As a result, I pulled back out of a lot of stuff. I'm not active in my valley as much as I used to be presently. I just focus on Research Lodge of Colorado and a few other, appendant bodies. And that's really it. Which, because you could do Masonry every day if you wanted to, but my wife would definitely leave me.
Yeah, inadvisable to say the least.
Yes. I mean, Masonry should always be, it shouldn't be just a hobby. I mean, it's certainly something, and it's important, and it definitely helped me improve my behavior. I mean, when I came to the Masonic fraternity, I was young and was fairly unemployable probably, and Masonry really helped just give me a direction, get my head straight. It really, really did. And for that, I'll be forever thankful to the fraternity. And it also met some really amazing people. In fact, I became a patent agent because my boss was a Mason. We went through the Scottish Rite together through the Valley of Grand Junction. And we used to, for me to go to the Scottish Rite, it was a 2.5-hour drive one way. So it was like, the whole day, and I'd get back at like 2, 3 in the morning. But I would drive to Montrose, and then I would often ride up with a couple of other guys, one of whom was a guy called Mark Crosley, who was a patent attorney based out of Montrose, Colorado. And he ended up hiring me to ghostwrite patents after reading my trestle boards that I was putting together for Telluride Lodge back then. I was working at a library, and I ended up buying their old copy machine, which they were going to throw away because it was obsolete. You could never repair it anymore. They sold it to me for like, a couple of bucks. It was really, get it out of here and you can have it. So I managed to load it onto a friend's pickup and drove it out to my house in Norwood. I used to print the newsletter, the trestle board for the Telluride Lodge on, legal paper. And just Xerox kind of quality, and mail it out. And he ended up hiring me to do that, which is how I fell into this whole thing. So for him, I'm also eternally grateful.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, totally bizarre, totally random and unexpected. I never thought of myself as doing this, but it's odd. I'm actually quite good at being a patent writer. God knows why, I guess. I don't know. But I enjoy it most of the time, except for the deadlines and some of the stress. But it's fun to work with inventors, right? It's ideas, and you're explaining stuff and you're putting it into words. The word patent means to manifest, to make open, right? To sort of manifest into reality. So by letters patent, we are disclosing an idea in a way that is understandable, that is sensible, so that it can be practiced by a person of ordinary skill in the art, is the term that we use. And in so doing, we're kind of, manifesting something into reality, which is kind of, it's just really neat. You get to meet some very interesting people.
Oh, okay. Well, so you had said that you stepped back from, quite a bit Masonically, but, you, as you mentioned, you're still, you're secretary of the Colorado Lodge of Research, right?
Yes, Research Lodge of Colorado. Yep. Okay,
and you're also chief adept for the SRICF, correct? For the state?
Yes, I am. Of Colorado College, yes.
Is there anything else that you're currently, I guess, involved with or working on?
I guess I'm on the jurisprudence committee for the Grand Chapter of Colorado, although I haven't really done too much. And there's some other stuff I do locally, but I'm mainly involved with the Grand Encampment. As a past department commander, I'm on the education committee for the Grand Encampment. So we're trying to put together an online education platform, kind of a Moodle. Some of your listeners may or may not be aware of it, but they probably are if they're in the commandery. Right now, we've got a couple of courses up. We've got 3 courses up, I think. Or maybe it's just 2. The third one is about to come out, and there's a 4th one that's in development. But basically, there's a quiz on, the Templar ritualist. How well do you know the ritual? And if you can get through that course, I think you know the ritual pretty well. And then another one is on Malcolm Barber's book, The New Knighthood, and it focuses on the medieval Templars. And then the third course is going to be on the trial of the Templars, another Malcolm Barber. Malcolm Barber is a consummate historian, Cambridge University, I think it's Cambridge Press, and his books are taken to be kind of the credible research into the history of the temple. So we focus on those books. Adam Hathaway has been spearheading those 2 courses. And then the 4th one is a prelate ministering course that's being put together by the assistant grand prelate, Robert Elsner, for the Grand Encampment. And he's just doing that all by himself because he's got a lot of Moodle experience. So we're very excited to see what he comes out with. Yeah, it's pretty neat. And then, other sort of things here and there, but for the most part, Research Lodge is my love, and the college. So I'm still an officer actually in the Red Cross of Constantine here, but we don't meet that often. It's a pretty low stress job, and I'm the preceptor or whatever it is of the Holy Royal Arch Knight Templar Priests for this year. But in Colorado, in our particular tabernacle, that's also a fairly low stress job.
Okay. Speaking of the Knight Templar educational courses, so I've completed the first one, and I'm currently working on the second one. But I have to say, I was really surprised the beautiful certificate you get for completing the first one.
Nice.
I was blown away by that.
Well, my hat is off to our grading subcommittee for putting that together. That was a long process that took a while to get out, but it should be sort of handwritten, and it was hand calligraphy originally, right? That was done for that. So Yeah, I should thank Mike Sakira and I can't believe I'm spacing his name. He's such an important member of our committee. It's because it's late. I apologize. I'll come back to him once I remember.
All right. All right. So Ben, how old were you when you actually joined Masonry before you moved on to, as you said, you've already been Grand Commander, you've been Department Commander, your Grand Order. What age, though, did you join the fraternity?
It was in 2006. So okay. I think I would have been, 24, so 30, I think. 28, 30, somewhere around there. My math is right. 30, I think 30 years old. I think it was 2006.
All right. And
I think I joined the Scottish Rite in 2008.
Okay. And what inspired you to join? What brought you in?
Well, that is a good question. I was part of my sort of misspent youth. I was petitioning political issues up and down the West Coast. This is one of the scary ways that democracy is force-fed, in certain states. And it was an interesting job because it was basically a way to travel for free. It was fairly decent money. And you would just sort of travel around. The downside of it, of course, is you didn't save any money because you're living in hotels and you're on the road, and it's pretty rough. And I did that for a few months, and I ended up in Seattle. And strange as it is to say, I was reading a couple of books that I just picked up in Portland at the University of Portland Library. I just sort of grabbed them at random from the shelf. And I'd been in Seattle when a particular book had come off the press, and for the first time it was translated into English. I just sort of fell down this weird rabbit hole. And I didn't have any bias or baggage or any sort of, pretext for any of this material. And something happened to me in this hotel room that really just changed my life. And it basically brought me to the door of the lodge. I was looking for what I thought was the remnants of this teaching, if you will. And sure enough, I think I found it in the ritual. I went into a lodge in Nucla, which is in the middle of nowhere on the western slope of Colorado. It's kind of on the way to Utah towards LaSalle Junction. It's an old mineral uranium mining town that was back in the 50s. The lodge was quite strong there because of Union Carbide had basically taken up residence in that area. But now it was completely defunctive. There was maybe 7 old guys, and I looked them up, and I joined. They were very, very thorough in everything they did. I wouldn't say they were particularly esoterically minded at all, but they seriously cared about the ritual. Word, letter, perfect work, and I didn't get a single letter key or anything like that until I was proficient. Until I stood my proficiency on the 3rd. They gave me a Bible and a single letter key book, and I did it all mouth to ear. The way that I think it's really supposed to be done. I would drive from Norwood to Nuclear, and I'd sit in that cold room with a guy called Ben Sievers, God bless him. He's now deceased, unfortunately. And we went through the first 2 degrees together. And I'll always remember Ben Sievers, as my coach. And it was really fun. It was a really interesting experience to wrap your head around those long sentences, that legalistic, sentence structure, that legalese. And I don't know, it was kind of strange. I left with the impression that maybe to a certain sense, Masonry collects souls for unfinished business, because when I was going through it, it was strange how easy it was to remember it. And it's not easy to remember, but it wasn't like learning it, it was like bringing it back from somewhere before. It was in my soul somewhere. So I just fell in love with it, even then, even in its most, unadorned form, in a really rural country lodge. All those men are now deceased. Norwood actually surrendered his charter, I think, just this year. It's completely defunctive at this point. Tried to keep it alive for as long as possible, but sadly, it wasn't going to happen. So anyway, in short, just some sort of fountain of secret knowledge in these books, which, is not secret at all. But if you come to them, like a lamb, then I think it has the power to transform the mind in ways that are completely unexpected. And if you look for it unexpected, maybe it wouldn't happen, but because it was completely unexpected, I never even heard of who Hermes Trismegistus was, let alone the definitions of Hermes, Trismegistus to Asclepius, which I still propound the most powerful logic circuits for awakening that I think exist. These 10 short paragraphs. They're absolutely incredible. Anyway, so yeah, that's probably sorry. Down memory lane. Thanks, Billy. Thanks, Gabe.
Well, that's what we're here for.
Right. Forget this is being recorded. I better be careful what I say.
No, actually,
Anyway.
yeah, no, that's fantastic. So looking at it and coming to it from that perspective, right, that it seemed to have found you at this moment when you kind of needed that transformative experience, right? Even if you weren't aware of it. What do you see then as the biggest strength and the biggest weakness of our fraternity as it's practiced today? And what are your thoughts of how we can improve upon it?
I gotta be careful I don't sound too elitist here, but I think the greatest strength is the work itself. I think everything is in the Blue Lodge. People often say that it's, kind of the porch, but everything is in the Blue Lodge. It's just veiled. Everything that you need to understand or may aspire to understand can be placed in that symbolism. And all the other orders and appendant bodies and invitational onis are kind of more focused versions of the same principles that are ultimately first expressed in the Blue Lodge. So I think the strength of Masonry is the mouth-to-ear tradition, is the love the brethren have for preserving the work and for making Masons, right? If you take that commitment to do it properly and drive wherever it is and meet with the guys and do it mouth to ear and become invested in it. If you do it that way, you're going to know it. And when you see it in your mind and the memory palace that you're building and making these memories, right, you become accustomed to certain ideas. And so it becomes easier to move through the chairs. So I think its strength is a type of microcosmic amplification to order the mind, to structure the mind, to get the candidate in a position that he can move to kind of to have some sort of, I don't want to say impact, but to have some sort of, to be able to be useful to his society. Does that make sense? So like when I went through the chairs, for example, I went from somebody terrified of public speaking to being able to stand up in a room full of crowded people and say anything without, my pulse getting too outrageously out of control. I mean, obviously it still goes up, but nonetheless, it's not like it used to be. And moving through those chairs, I became a much more well-adjusted individual for the social contract. Does that make sense? Now, what is its weakness? I think its weakness is that a lot of our brethren have come to the door perfunctorily, and they've come for, I wouldn't necessarily say the wrong reasons, but maybe for a type of status. And what I find to be perhaps the most problematic with our fraternity, and this I think is one of our biggest criticisms, it's certainly one of the biggest criticisms that the church has levied against us, is that it becomes kind of a distraction. And it becomes a way for people that have not necessarily made a life for themselves to define themselves Masonically. And I fear that in certain individuals, we end up with this sort of title hunting madness that is almost like acquiring status through a position in this fraternity and a desire to gain the seat and the office rather than to emulate what the office is meant to represent. And we see this all over the country, unfortunately. We see a kind of dictatorial tyranny rising out of vanity from people, I think, who've attained the office through ambition rather than, let's say an aspiration, if there is a distinction. So in that regard, this beautiful plethora of degrees that raise a man up in status, and certainly with the fancy titles like thrice illustrious master, right? Most puissant grand master, all of these kind of insane titles, which, are valid and worthy titles. It's not the titles that are wrong. I fear that we've created an impression that man goes up through the degrees as he ascends a ladder rather than emptying himself to be more suited for the indwelling of deity, dare I say it. I think the 32nd degree should be kind of almost an emptying as well as an attainment, right? It's something to be aspired to, but, we give them in a weekend, right? We do the 3 orders of the temple in a weekend. I did the order of the temple in what we call the Bridge to Light. They did the whole York Rite in a weekend here in Denver. And even more funnily, they did it in chronological order of the degrees. So it wasn't even, in the normal York Rite progression. It was what was believed to be the oldest degrees first. So it was this hodgepodge of crazy, like York Rite madness. And then, of course, the order of the temple. A profound experience. Sitting on the sideline. I mean, I was still troubled by that order, actually, to be fair, for quite a while. It kind of disturbed me a little bit. Over time, not a big deal. But at first, I was a little bit put out by it. And then later on, I was the junior warden, and I was coming back from the Chamber of Reflection with the report. And my guys, this is in Montrose, it was Ure Commandery number 10, Montrose Ure Commandery number 10. They grabbed me and they brought me in to the candlelit, altar and did the libations and so on and so forth. And even though I knew what was happening, the difference in effect from being there in that dark candlelit room with these men finishing the Lord's Prayer and rising like shadows in this holy light was absolutely profound, and I think we cheapen ourselves sometimes by trying to do the numbers rather than making the experience what it's meant to be. I think it's hard, and it should be hard to make Masons. You need 3 past masters to make a Royal Arch Mason, 3 most excellent masters. Right. And often we have 2 guys just filling in for the one guy we're going to put in, or we have 3 guys as exemplars for a class of 10. In Colorado, that's common because we don't have huge numbers like you guys have in Texas. But I feel like you'd have to wait the old days. And we also farm it out. There was a time when there was like 2 people that could do the excellent high priest part. And now there's still 2 people, but I'm one of them. And I haven't done it for a couple of years, mind you. But what we seem to do is we push candidates to these festivals, we call them. And you go to one festival and you go through, the chapter degrees. Then maybe a couple of months later, you go to the other festival and you go through the council degrees. And then you go to the other festival and you go through the orders of knighthood. I think each chapter should be doing that work. And I think each lodge should be each lodge more so does its own work than we see in these other things. Excuse me. But so that's a rather long-winded response, but I hope that kind of makes sense.
No, it does actually. And so for the, the bodies that Gabriel and I are in, we emphasize, giving each candidate an individual experience. One thing that he started as commander of our commandery, and that I've continued, is that each person in our commandery each candidate who comes through and gets an order of the temple, they get an individual order of the temple.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because it's not meant to be something where you sit on the sidelines and watch. It's something that's meant to be experienced.
Yes, I totally agree. And how profound is it? The first degree obviously is hugely impactful. The 3rd degree is hugely impactful. I think the Royal Arch degree, if it's done right, is hugely impactful. And then the Order of the Temple. Wow, there's just nothing like it. So we have great tools. We've got great software, right? It just, do we run it on the right hardware, I guess?
And that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, actually. I think that's a fantastic answer. Thank you.
Well, and I, to continue the software analogy, have our, are we running it on the right hardware? But also, perhaps more importantly, have we taught the users how to use the software? And in many cases, unfortunately, the answer is no.
Yeah.
You're very right, my friend. Yes.
Well,
it is difficult, right, to sort of peel it apart too much. I think maybe we need to watch the West Gate. Maybe that's the simple way to reduce it to just 3 words or 4 words. Watch the West Gate.
True, and something that we've talked about on past episodes, so that we've dedicated the entire episode to, guarding the West Gate.
Yes, because I think especially now in this age that we're entering, many men are coming to the lodge well-informed. In many cases, more well-informed than the brethren conferring the degrees. So now it becomes our task to keep these young men, but also to make sure that they're worthy and well qualified. I mean, if we actually lived up to the words that we memorize, right? I mean, it has within it encoded exactly what needs to be done. So there's no need to, you know what I mean? We just need to live up to what we're saying. It's so funny. I mean, I'm not going to call out any particular lodge, but there was a candidate here in Colorado who, seemed like a nice guy. They did the investigation. Everything was fine. They initiated him, in short order. Maybe it was the 6-month requirement, who knows? He'd shown up for a few dinners. He goes home after being initiated and commits felony arson by burning somebody's garage to the ground.
Oh my God.
It turns out that this guy had just given a fake name, a fake identity, and nobody had checked it out. No one visited his house. Nobody figured out that this was a fake ID, basically. It's like, how does that happen?
That is incredible.
He had a rap sheet as long as your arm. He was just curious, right? What are these Masons up to?
Man, what a nightmare.
It happens too often, my friends.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you guys are being hit with the rife embezzlement that seems to be going on, but it's just, anyway, we don't need to go down that road.
Yeah. Knock on wood, we have avoided that.
Yeah, Texas is such a healthy jurisdiction. You got 100,000, 90,000 Masons or something?
Oh, no.
We're
about
at
half that.
Yeah, I believe we are just under, I think the last count I remember is 57,000.
Okay, that's pretty good, though. We're about 5,700, so you're 10 times the size of us.
Yeah, our York right actually is, I think it's down to about 5,400 York right.
Yeah. It's the size of our Grand Lodge.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
So I'm dying to learn more about your publications. And I'll defer mostly to Billy on these questions, since he's kind of more in the authoring and publishing world than I am, and a little bit more literate than I am. But as we kind of alluded to earlier in the podcast, you have a publishing company and you run 2 Masonic magazines through it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, firstly, thanks, Gabe, for the shout out. I really appreciate the opportunity to, reach your audience with this information. And secondly, you're not a bad graphic designer from what I've seen. So thank you for all the work you do.
Why, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Okay. So Laughing Lion Laughing Lion LLC was set up in about 2012, 2013, I think it was, originally to publish the Rocky Mountain Mason. And this magazine that sprung out of some other conversations, and it's a kind of a long story, but another magazine was produced kind of in its stead for a while. And then the Rocky Mountain Mason sort of came out of a desire to create something that was more kind of current events and could represent originally Colorado Masonry. But of course, it expanded to have content that we hope is of interest to any Mason. And the other publication we put out fairly recently, I think about 2 years ago now, maybe a year and a half ago, was the Esoteric Mason, which is more kind of material, more geared towards these guys looking for open-minded people that are looking for kind of, I don't know, more sort of hidden stuff, right? So kind of the weird stuff that might not always be appropriate for something like the Rocky Mountain Mason, which has I think a broader readership. So, unfortunately, both of them are somewhat stalled in production, and I am the weak link here. And law school was definitely a major, impediment to the Rocky Mountain Masons' growth. My editor just had a baby. It's now about 2 years ago we had the child, but he's been sort of distracted and busy, and I'm not being a good leader in that respect. So it's about 6 months late on the current issue, I'm afraid to admit, here publicly. But it is about to come back on its schedule as soon as I can get in my damn office. So I bought this office New Year's Eve of 2020. I closed on it, and I've yet to take possession of the damn space. It's 780 square feet, and I thought, this is going to be great. This is somewhere that I can, set up shop, do my law practice, have my publishing company, and I'll own it. It's going to be fantastic. Oh, more fool me. asbestos issues and contractor issues, and it's actually almost made me go broke, this ridiculously stupid office. So
Wow.
now it's, gosh, I think I started construction after the asbestos was removed in October of last year, and now it's almost a year later and I'm still not in it. Finally you've got everything in. I'm just waiting for the electrician to finish up the lights. But Denver's insane, and I'm a fool. I paid these guys too early, and they've been taking advantage of me ever since. So it's been very difficult.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you had to deal with asbestos abatement, because that is a expensive process.
Oh yeah. I paid. The amount I paid for this office was an incredibly good deal, which is why I bought it, especially where it is, which is sort of just between Broadway and like downtown Littleton in sort of greater Denver area. It's a very nice up and coming area, and it's gonna grow that particular place quite substantially in the coming years. So it was a bargain, right? It was the cheapest per square foot you could find anywhere. And this is why, because it's a common interest community. So it's like a commercial condo. And no one has bothered to, do anything properly in this building since it was built in like 1968. And I was expecting asbestos in the floor, even though I wouldn't say they lied to me. They kind of weren't forthcoming about the fact that there was asbestos, but I kind of guessed there would be, but I did not expect it to be in the walls. So, if I was smart, I would have done the environmental test prior to buying the damn place, but I just didn't feel like spending more money. You know what I mean? At the time, I was like, screw it, if there's asbestos, I'll just pay for it to be removed. It's a good price, right? So we ripped it all out, and everything would have still worked out really well. I got a nice loan from the Small Business Administration under the COVID thing, so I had a great payback kind of time frame. And man, the whole thing has just turned into an absolute nightmare. And basically, I hired the wrong people. That's really what happened. And they ripped me off. They ripped me off $40,000. So I had to pay another $40,000 to put the stuff back in, which they didn't do right to begin with. And then the second contractor has just been, just too busy. I mean, Denver's stupid. That's the problem. Everybody's got way too much going on, and you got to pay us so we can get the guys in there and we'll get it finished. You pay them, then they just don't show up. So anyway, that's been my life. As a result, most of my stuff is still in boxes. So it was never supposed to be this delayed. Law school was one delay, and I pivoted it. I was expecting to be in there by the end of March, and I was going to get everything organized and get the mail station set up. And now I've got the problem that when somebody subscribes, I don't really have a mail fulfillment area. I've got to dig through boxes. I've got to print stuff out. I've got to run between these different locations. I don't have the space in my house to accommodate it. And so it's been a bit, I apologize to any subscribers that are waiting for the magazine to arrive. That's why, but it is coming, I promise. In fact, the issue that is current, that is late, is basically ready to go. It just hasn't been laid out yet. So another issue I've had is my layout guy got a hugely important job at an advertising agency in Denver, and he's slowly been, getting more and more busy. So it's difficult to try to grab him back out, but I will once I'm ready to do so. So,
well, in all fairness, not only are you doing your own publishing, but you're also now the editor for the Knight Templar magazine as well, right?
Correct. Yes, sir. And that is actually really fun. I just finished putting together the October issue today. So, it's about a 2-month lead time on all of that. And of course, I cannot miss those deadlines. And luckily that stuff is all virtual. You know what I mean? I don't have all these boxes and stuff, and I don't do the mailing or the fulfillment. I'm really just editing and doing the layout so that I can maintain in my schedule. But yes, that's been a really fun job. And for folks who don't know, originally this was planned probably, I think 4 years ago when I was brought on as the assistant editor, the idea being that when John wanted to retire, actually about now, I would take over. And even though things kind of went a bit weird for a while there, and I was kind of removed as the assistant editor for a while, everything kind of came back together, actually according to the original timeline, which was kind of really interesting. So I hope you guys like the new look for the magazine, and hoping to kind of maybe even change it some more in the future. We're exploring options. And this is some feedback I'd love to hear from your listeners, actually. You've got a lot of Knights Templar in Texas. Would you guys like to see a full-sized magazine? Would you be comfortable with a bi-monthly or quarterly publication cycle? I think we're going bi-monthly if we do go full-size. And would you be okay with, us trying to fund it through some ad sales? And these would hopefully be ads that are appropriate, right? You shouldn't look at advertising in print as a distraction. It's not like television where you're a captive audience and they raise the volume. You can just turn a page. So when it comes to print advertising,
it's not like anybody it's not like you get like the issue of GQ and you go, oh my gosh, they're advertising clothing in this. How dare they? Presumably, you would see an advertisement for a Masonic item or Masonic adjacent item. Or
how about this? How about Rolex?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that I can't afford a Rolex, but I know Masons that wear them. And my point is that this magazine costs a lot to print and it costs a lot to mail. Right now we mail to 61,000 readers, right? That's a lot of money. I won't tell you how much it is, but it's the largest expense the Grand Encampment bears. Now, if we were to actually price the ads appropriate to the true cost of producing the magazine, like most magazines do, think of Freemasonry Today out of England, for example, then we could actually fund the magazine through ad sales. The problem is that the ads become, $4,000 for a full page. You know what I mean? So we'd have to get advertisers that would be willing to pay that amount. Now, that doesn't mean that, Masonic regalia companies wouldn't be able to have the same type of representation that they currently have at a similar size in a full-size magazine. It just means there would be other advertisers in there too. So, Gabe, it wouldn't necessarily be, purely Masonic items that are listed for sale. The idea would be, though, to create Pareto Optima, right? We want to make that sale. We want to have the right price, and we want it to work for the advertisers and the readers. So if the reader finds something he wants and makes a purchase, then we've succeeded in that. It becomes kind of a service rather than a kind of distraction. So, things like Viking Cruise Lines, maybe, or special offers on cruises. We have, I don't know, I'm not the ad sales guy, but that kind of stuff I don't think would be inappropriate necessarily. I'm, of course, open to criticism on that point. So what do you guys think?
I think, I'm not opposed to it, especially if it helps create a product that is. I'm very big on objects that you can touch that have like substantial heft and weight and stuff. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but
no, I agree, actually, 100%.
It's very cool to have like a tangible item that you can tell just by touching it. You go, oh, this is pretty high quality, right? And to have a magazine that is appropriately funded and that, okay, maybe it drops to bi-monthly or quarterly or however the case may be. But if that results in a nicer magazine, we have an incredible product already with the Knight Templar magazine. But what if we stepped it up a notch and turned it into the kind of magazine that you go, man, that is nice enough that you can leave that on the coffee table in the waiting room of an office, right? Like
that would be perfect. Yes.
Like a professional setting, and you go, this is something that I want my clients to look at and know, like, oh, hey, this is quality material, and that might be kind of shallow on my end, but it's very marketable.
It isn't, because it's our brand, right? It's our brand, and our brand should be protected. Our brand should be like, I think of the square and compasses. The square and compasses should be put on items that kind of like a seal of quality. If the square and compasses are on the spine of a book, the book should represent that brand well. We shouldn't tarnish the brand. I'm not saying we do currently at all. Our magazine right now is very, very fraternally friendly. It's very engineered for our membership, which is fantastic. But I second your point there, that if it could be of such content and quality that anybody could read it and say, wow, who are the Knights Templar? This is really interesting. Right now, if we read it, it's going to be a lot of information for the membership who are already members, which is a definitely important service. Most of our readers are elderly, to be frank. I think the average age of the Grand Encampment is about 72. So there's a lot of people read this magazine. They read it because maybe they don't get out as much as they used to, and they read it because it's familiar and it's friendly and they see their friends in there. And that is something we definitely want to keep. But at the same time, I would love us to get away from the idea that it has to be just about the history of the Knights Templar, right? Or the Christian religion. Wouldn't it be great? My example is, the Wall Street Journal is not just read on Wall Street. The Christian Science Monitor isn't just about Mary Baker Eddy, right? Wouldn't it be great if we could add in stuff that's of interest to Knights Templar, even if it's not strictly speaking Masonic? Here's an example. I haven't done this article, but it's one I'd love to write. I don't know if I can. I'd obviously rather somebody else do it. One of the things I hope we can do is begin to pay for per word for submissions to sort of up the quality and support freelance writers. But what about this for an idea for an article? The patriarch of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church, and the schism that is being created in the Orthodox community as a result of Putin's invasion. Now, is that political? I mean, kind of, but we're not taking a position, right? We're talking about what's happening to the church and the weird recognition between, the Patriarch of Alexandria and Antioch, say, and Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia trying to downplay the patriarch's role, if that makes sense. And so what we're really reviewing and discussing is the structure of the Orthodox Church, which is something that is, I don't think, well known among us Western Christians, right? And I find the Orthodox Church to be really fascinating on many, many levels, as well as certain, parts of the Latin Mass and everything else as well, of course. But forever, the Eastern Church has been broken between various patriarchs, right, or metropolitans or whatnot, that kind of recognize each other as a kind of a synod. There isn't one throne of power like there is in the Latin Church. As a result, it's had this long-standing mystical tradition that's not been as subject to sort of revision by one man. They still confer the Mass in song in many Eastern churches, and they still face away from the congregation. Vatican II turned the priest to administer the host to the audience, if you will, and make him something of a performer. But there's nothing wrong with these things. They're interesting things to discuss that aren't necessarily currently featured in the magazine.
Right, and those are all things that, we make a big deal out of the fact that, hey, this is Christian Masonry. Templar Masonry is Christian Masonry, and we are here to enhance our faith and practice, but we don't talk about all of these aspects of Christianity. A lot of times you see one of the things that happens in Templary is that we focus so heavily on the ritual and getting it right and whatnot, and that's a very laudable, good thing, and I don't think we should let that fall by the wayside, but we lose focus of the fact that this is a fundamentally Christian organization. And so even just something, an article as basic as, hey, this is what a Greek Orthodox service looks like. This is what the Divine Mass of St. John looks like, right? And just walk the reader through that, right? And that's a very entry-level subject, but it's something that guys can kind of bite into and take a look at and say, oh, okay, today I learned something about the way that my Christian brothers practice their faith, whether it's the next town over in the Greek Orthodox Church or on the other side of the world in actual Greece, Yeah. And I think that's very valuable to us as Templars.
I do too, because Christianity is such a multi-form religion. It's not one type of Christianity. I think we often forget that in our, my Church of England background or your evangelical background or whatever it may be. We tend to think that that's what Christianity is. But in fact, Christianity is a very pluralistic stream, especially if we go to sort of Oregon and the early, patriarchs, the founding patriarchs of the Christian church. There's a lot of very interesting material out there that could certainly be explored. But how about this? Let's go even further. What if we were to do a review of a car? Would that be inappropriate for the Knight Templar magazine? I don't know.
I'd never thought about that. I don't think it would be a bad idea necessarily. One of the things it would be good to say, hey, let's tie things into Templary somehow. But I think, for a Masonic magazine that had a broader scope, kind of like a hey, this is kind of like a gentleman's organization and we aspire to gentlemanly things, then I think
Exactly.
like a
Yes.
Masonic magazine that was focused on let's say high caliber gentleman's culture, right? Then a car review would
Yes.
certainly make sense, right?
Yeah, like the Bretts. In fact, you just reminded me that Angel Miller, when he guest edited the Fraternal Review out of the Southern California Research Lodge, he did a whole thing on how to dress well as a man. That's brilliant, right? This is easy reading, but it's also useful. It's also beneficial, and it's also establishing that kind of culture of gentlemanly masonry that we're all after. And I think any good Masonic publication should really cover. The esoteric Mason is kind of the exception because that's definitely a cult-based and kind of anything that's strange and unusual goes in that magazine. But something like the Rocky Mountain Mason or like Freemasonry Today is another great example of a magazine that is balancing very well in this space, is broadening the scope of the content to be, if it's of interest to Masons, then it's Masonic. If it's of interest to Knights Templar, then it's suitable for publication. And that way we open up the pages to freelance submissions by people who may not even be members. I think of the Scottish Rite Journal, Freemasonry Today, which is the United Grand Lodge of England's magazine. It's published by a completely separate publishing house. It's actually written and handled and managed. They've outsourced the whole thing. And, many of their contributors are women. And are they writing about Masonry? I mean, yes and no, right? There's a lot of current events, a lot of photographs, a lot of His Royal Highness Duke of Kent doing this. And, these Freemasons have formed this lodge and they're all football players and lots of charity stuff. And it's all good. But there's also other things in there of general interest. And these could be current events. They could be historical. I mean, there's a wealth of information to mine about the historical Knights Templar. But frankly, we're retreading old ground. It's been trod for 700 years. You know what I mean? So when it comes to the Knight Templar magazine, we have a review board that reviews all the submissions. And the majority of submissions don't get voted for publication, which gives you an idea of how many submissions we get by what you see published in there, right? So it would do a greater service to the readers and to the magazine itself to be able to have more broad scope of content. It's got to be quality, don't get me wrong, but I'm trying to think of a good example. I mean, the Christian Science Monitor is too far, right? But it's a good example for our purposes here. It started as a magazine for the Church of Christian Science, right? And now the Christian Science Monitor has got really nothing to do with Christian Science. I'm not saying, of course, the Knight Templar magazine should have nothing to do with Templary, but actually some of the best reporting in the world is sometimes in the Christian Science Monitor. They've got people embedded in friggin', Syria or whatever, reporting back. I'm not saying you should do that, but my point is that, it's evolved. And even though that masthead is still on there and that brand, and we will always cater for our readership and our members, to me, it makes sense to try to find a nice mix of content that, you want to read. And some of it's going to be lighthearted. Some of it's going to be diagrammatic. I mean, a great example might be to have a picture of a Sonite and point out all of the regalia on there and why it is the way that it is, because that's always a constant conversation, right? Among our uniformed order. And then show some nice variances like Southern California. They have some really cool Class A uniforms. Have you seen those? You've seen those, right, Gabe? Billy, have you seen those?
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure if I have.
The silver and black ones that yeah.
Oh,
like sort of like the Three Amigos, but they're absolutely awesome. They got like a cape and it's all like embroidered. It's really neat.
Oh, I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head here, right? There's no reason why we shouldn't open up the Knight Templar magazine and amid a selection of carefully curated advertisements targeted towards gentlemen, right? See, say, for example, a spread of articles, one of which might be, let's say, a biography of a certain military commander during the 100 Years' War, and then another article that discusses, color pairing how to pair colors when you're putting together a suit, and you're dressing in business formal, and you want to maybe add a little bit of pop without going too overboard, and then have a different article that says, hey, here's this theological debate going on in the Christian world right now. And the article is a 2-column article written by 2 separate authors, one on one side of the debate, one on the other side of the debate. And we leave it up to the reader to decide what's going on. And then have the final article be, hey, here's how you can improve handicap accessibility at your commandery. Right?
I mean, I see all of, yes, that's perfect.
There's no reason why we shouldn't see that spread of articles, right? As Masons, we should kind of be looking to always have a diversity of information at our fingertips, and to be consuming a diversity of information.
Yes, and be open-minded to entertain an idea without necessarily accepting it. 100% agree. So you'd be okay with if Rolex decided they wanted to advertise, which I don't know if they will, but if they did, would it be okay to have a Rolex ad in the Knight Templar magazine?
I would look at that and go, wow, we must be kind of a big deal now if Rolex is advertising for us. I mean,
Patek Philippe, you never really own a Patek Philippe. You just look after it for the next generation.
To be totally honest, it's like when I look at, if I were to encounter, let's say, a Rolex ad in the Knight Templar magazine, my first reaction would be maybe mild confusion, but then my next reaction would be, wow, we have garnered some attention on some level where an international company has decided that we are a suitable target market. And that makes me feel good, because even, for example, if I can't afford a Rolex, it makes me feel good that I am considered part of a potential target demographic for that item. And so I think a lot of Sir Knights may actually feel encouraged by that.
I hope so. I mean, I really do. I hope they would want to do it. I'm sorry, Billy, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, on the flip side too, when you think about it, I mean, how many magazines have, besides the ones that you see like People or Time or whatever, but I mean, how many, especially for a narrow scope kind of magazine that it is at the current time, right? Not necessarily, if we implement some of the, things that we've talked about here. But how many have a readership of 67,000 every single month that you could say? I could see how that could be attractive to different companies.
Very, very few magazines of this scope have that readership.
Yeah, and that's just who we mail it to. You think that a lot of them end up in lodges, and I'll tell you, a lot of ladies read the magazine. So 61,000 distribution is more like 100,000 readers. I mean, easily, right? Because of the wives and the non-members that might come across the magazine. Plus, it's now online.
I know a lot of commanderies where they put the magazine out at Temple on a regular basis. The book on the coffee table, or they see it in the lounge. Or hey, maybe somebody left one on a side table in the dining room, and it always gets read at some point.
Exactly. So our plan has got to be to reach companies for whom our readership could make sales. And in order for that to work, it means our readers are looking for these items. So I think, cruises, hotel deals, luxury goods like Rolex and Patek Philippe. I mean, Patek Philippe's current ad, which they run in The Economist, is a grandfather giving a watch to his grandson. And the tagline is, you never really own a Patek Philippe. You just hold on to it for the next generation. Right there is a way to transfer wealth between family members and basically avoid taxes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But what a fantastic marketing slogan, though, right? It's part of it is, it's very multifaceted, right? So you have the family aspect, but you also have beyond the family aspect, you have this broader abstract concept of legacy, right?
Yes.
And legacy is very important. And then you have something tangential to legacy, but somewhat different, right? The difference is subtle: tradition, right?
Yes.
And then above all else, this is a family heirloom. It's very valuable. It costs a lot of money. You are obviously using imagery and aesthetics of wealth. And so the tagline there evokes a number of different sensors in the brain where you go, oh, wow, this is like a hugely important message. And that's stuff that we can benefit from as Masons, anything that excites those portions of our brain when we look at the magazine is a useful thing to us, because then the reader is left with, they might not remember all of the contents of the magazine, but something that they're going to have kind of floating around in the back of their head is, hey, when I picked up that magazine, I felt good. I don't remember why, but I felt good.
Which is awesome.
And it's a powerful thing.
I'll tell you something else I just did today. I had 2 pages that I wanted to fill up. So actually, let me put this out there to your listeners too. Please send us content for review by the editorial review board. If you're a Masonic writer, please submit articles to me at ben@knightstemplar.org. We have about 3 months more of articles, and of course we'll have more in time, but it's nice to have like an overwhelming amount to choose from. So please, if you've been thinking about writing something, do so and send it. Back to my original point. We used to do nights at the bookshelf, which is great. Book reviews, reading Masonic authors, and that's fantastic. And we will continue to do that. But for 2 issues, I've done movie nights and reviewed, for example, Maverick was one of the movie reviews we did. And I managed to get old Bill from the Scottish Rite. Why am I forgetting his name? My goodness, I'm not having a good evening tonight. It's late here, and I've had a very long day. But you know who I mean. He used to teach Top Gun. So anyway, he gave a quote for it, which I thought was kind of a nice tie-in. And today, I wrote a review for the movie Elvis, which has got very little Masonic attachment whatsoever. Although between you and me, Elvis did have some Masonic books on his bookshelf and was at least peripherally interested in the symbolism of the fraternity. Of course, none of that is in there. Now, is that appropriate? Are you guys going to be upset by those reviews when you read them?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that we can't forget is that Masons are human beings that live in the societies in which they're located. And that is something that, for better or worse, we can't get away from. And if you let your entire life be Masonry and somebody says, I've had this real life interaction before, hey, did you, a younger guy at the lodge asked us about some movie that came out. Hey, have you seen, XYZ? And the past master that was sitting with us says, oh, I don't know. I've been so busy doing Masonic stuff that I just kind of phased going to the movies out entirely. I haven't been to the movies in 14, 15 years. And I've realized at that point, I was like, man, I haven't been to the movies in 2 years. And I very quickly after that grabbed my wife and said, hey, movie night, we're going to go to the movies, because it was like, oh, I'm losing touch on society here.
And it's a great medium. It's a great art medium. The movies and more these days, the power of the editing software that we're leveraging, we're able to almost assemble a dreamscape. You don't even need a script anymore. Both Maverick and this movie are so incredibly well edited. It's amazing. I strongly recommend seeing Elvis, even if you're not a fan of his, because it's just such a well-made film. It really is brilliant. And by the way, the guy's name is Bill Sizemore. I apologize, the COVID brain here. And Phil Hardiman was the other name I couldn't remember. Phil Hardiman is the subcommittee chair for the grading of the Grand Encampment Education Committee, without whom we could not long subsist. So Phil, if you ever do listen to this, I apologize. COVID, I could see your face in my mind, but your name just came to me. So Phil Hardiman and Bill Sizemore. Sorry, I just wanted to say that because I just felt really bad.
No worries, actually. And so I know we dwelled actually, and it was unintentional, right? We talked a lot about the Knight Templar magazine. I'd like to go back to, so you were talking about the Rocky Mountain Mason is kind of your magazine for, I guess, more of kind of a generalized, well, and maybe that's an unfair term, right? But the Rocky Mountain Mason is really kind of about Masonic news and educational information, but your esoteric Mason is really like laser focused on esoteric topics, right?
And the paranormal.
Actually, and that's true. So I'm looking at the table of contents for the last issue you had, right? Issue number 3. And
yeah.
So you have the search for the Skinwalker, which you wrote, right? And
yeah, that was a fun article, man. That was a fun trip too. Man, that was weird. Yeah, so the Rocky Mountain Mason is more general interest, and there's definitely stuff of heady historical and even esoteric background. I mean, I think of the articles that Patrick Day has contributed as our editor for the Rocky Mountain Mason, and they're all very, very interesting. He did one on the ruffians. He's done one on, just a whole slew of subjects. Patrick is a consummate researcher, and he's indefatigable in the amount that he consumes and can digest and reiterate. I would say the Rocky Mountain Mason tries to sort of cover the gamut. It has some sort of weird stuff, but for the most part, it's kind of historical, philosophical, general interest. The esoteric Mason, on the other hand, is absolutely dedicated to the strange and the unusual. So it would be, certain occult esoteric traditions. Jamie Lamb has been a contributor to that. Danny P.D. Newman has been a contributor to that. Kevin Townley has been a contributor to that, as well as to the Rocky Mountain Mason, as it happens. But, if you're going to get into sort of and the paranormal, the Skinwalker Ranch, R.J. Johnson has got a paranormal column that I hope he continues in the Esoteric Mason. It's been a really fun magazine to put together. I really did it because I thought it was something that, I would want to read and that I thought was appropriate to the millennial Mason, perhaps.
Right. And so I was intrigued by the article in here too, that where you talk about how Waite was wrong to reassociate some of his elemental correspondences in the tarot.
Which I still maintain. Absolutely. Yeah. Wait, don't play with fire. So Waite famously changed the correspondences of wands, which were staves, and swords from fire to air, respectively. Originally, swords were the element of fire, and staves or wands were air. And Waite decided back in the fin de siècle, occult revival, that fire was the divine element and it should be first. Kabbalah be damned, right? And in so doing, he divorced the tarot from a very overarching symmetry, which it has with kind of the Kabbalistic ideas of air being the first element. I mean, there are still some Masonic traditions where the trials of the elements exclude the element of air. So you're just tried by fire, water, and earth. Why are you not tried by air? Well, because the ruach is the breath. And of course, the air contains the fire and the water. Hermes tells us that the wind carries it in its belly, right? So Aleph is the first letter, right? Anyway, I'm getting a little bit esoteric here by accident. I've had a whiskey while we've been on the phone, so forgive me there. But yes, I mean, that's basically the thrust of that article, is that Waite, he did many things to the tarot. Like he switched strength and justice, right? And then he took credit for it all. And, I got a lot of respect for Waite, don't get me wrong. I think there's some traditions which some of your listeners will be familiar with that Waite certainly collected. And in many sense, Waite was something of an occult tourist. He collected more degrees and, rights than perhaps anybody else, and tried to codify them into a sort of overarching grand college or grand council of rights, which he sought to administer over the whole. And he's interesting in that respect. He's interesting as an esotericist, but at the same time, Pamela Coleman Smith should have her name on that deck. That Rider-Waite Tarot is my least favorite of the tarot. Don't get me wrong. I apologize if you love it. It's everybody's first deck. Everybody loves that deck. I'm the rare exception. But it should be called the Smith-Waite Rider deck, right? Because she's the one who drew all the damn pictures.
Yeah, it's her artwork.
Yeah, she gets no credit. She doesn't get enough credit for that. It makes me just, Anyway, no, wait. He's an interesting fellow. And back in that time period, there's a lot of innovations I think were going on. And we see it in a guy called Blaker's work in the college, where he's basically applying a lot of the newly discovered asteroids into the scheme of the Thema Mundi. And this was kind of a new popular, what they termed esoteric astrology, which is coming out of the early 20th century. And of course, it has since been refuted by, among others, Einstein and the general theory of relativity. We didn't need this Vulcan, this secret planet that is close to the sun, to explain Mercury's eccentricity. Because guess what? Mercury as an archetype is eccentric. I mean, that's one of the qualities that he brings to bear is eccentricity. But more so, it was due to the general theory of relativity and gravitational, aspects allowed for that eccentricity without this hidden planet Vulcan. So you see Vulcan on the center of the Earth in the Rosicrucian degrees, and it probably shouldn't be there. So it was just part of that time period of innovation, everybody seeking to evolve the teachings. But I've always been of the opinion that it's not really a spiral. We're not going upwards. We're just going round and round and round. All eternity is a circle. Even if it spirals to its own beginning. That's why the snake is biting its own tail. You know what I mean? It's not a progression. Humanity continues, out of which the individual can ascend, or should I say, God can descend to the individual who is well prepared to receive him, and thus break the cycle of being and become one of the Ishim and attend at the throne among the host, echoing through the ages, Shaddai, Adonai, Jehovah, yay, yes, yay, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. So for the likes of Wade, I think the desire to improve something that didn't really need to be improved. Do we need a fifth wheel on the car? I mean, other than the steering wheel. Do we need a sixth wheel on the vehicle? I mean, 4 wheels suffices, right? So I like the Marseille. I like the traditional decks, but I am, a snob. So,
No, I mean, and you're right. He took a lot of these esoteric topics that were hidden. He made them easily accessible, but at the same time, he did add his own reinterpretation at times.
And he deconstructed it. You know what I mean? He made it something different than it was. It's still a very useful tool. It's just no longer. I'll give you another example. If you were to take the outer planets, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, and apply them into sort of an astrological reading. Now, I'm not talking about astrology for divinatory purposes here. I don't want to get your listeners all freaked out and stuff. But if you look at the symbolism of the 7 lights, the 7 lampstands before the throne of God, as set forth in Revelation, we see the 7 visible planets. And the 7 visible planets correspond beautifully to the 7 days of the week. And the whole thing is this beautiful order that has been advancing for, the better part of 4,000 years. To suddenly add in Uranus and Pluto and Neptune means now we need like a 10-day week. And the moment we get a 10-day week, as the Egyptians once had, is the moment that those planetary correspondences should be applied into the philosophy. But to break the symmetry for the sake of accommodating some kind of desired attribute is meaningless. We end up with these crazy modern astrologers with all these manifold aspects and hundreds of comets, and the chart is this scribbled mess, that is impenetrable, which is why I think, astrologers get a bad name, to be fair, because it was never really about predicting, the future. It was more about setting forth symbolically a unified understanding of all things. I think the best way to look at traditional astrology is to watch Shakespeare, watch Midsummer's Night's Dream. The whole thing is informed with that worldview, which falls apart as soon as you stick Uranus on Aquarius. Billy, please get Uranus off Aquarius.
Oh man.
It must be something I ate. That's why I had to go for the water bear. So wow, that definitely went places I was not expecting.
Well, I apologize, and thank you for allowing me to just run the train. So anyway.
No, so I do have to. So some of the listeners that we have, in kind of the start, kind of wrapping things up, because I want to be respectful of your time, as well as Gabriel. My family right now is sick with COVID, so I have some time. But I know Gabriel. You and your wife are expecting, so I'm sure she's going to want you to. You have a lot to prepare for.
Yes, I do.
Hopefully you got that big long pillow that she can hug.
Oh, yes, she does. She loves that thing.
Yeah, that's very important, that pillow. For any, young fathers out there, remember, make sure you get that big pillow.
I am fully stealing it from her after she is done being pregnant. So
the key is get two.
Yes, I think that was the lesson.
So Ben, if you don't mind, when we get at the end, I would love if you would share the information about how our listeners can find out more about Laughing Lion and the Rocky Mountain Mason and Esoteric Mason, how to subscribe to those, as well as you have your own podcast as well. Which
I do. Thank you, Billy.
Yeah, no, and that was, I have to admit, it was full of fantastic information. After Grand Encampment Triennial, whenever you came out with something, I listened. It was very informative, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening. Absolutely. So I have two websites, RockyMountainMason.com, spelled as it sounds, RockyMountainMason.com, and then LaughingLion.net, LaughingLion.net, and EsotericMason.com. So any of those websites will get you to. So LaughingLion.net is really merchandise. I have a few handmade silver rosaries left. They're rather expensive because they were handmade and they're silver and hematite, made in Italy, actually. And then some baseball caps. My fulfillment arc on the baseball caps is a little bit longer than the ties, although I do have found the box with them in. So the merchandise is being fulfilled. If you go to LaughingLion.net, you see something you like. It may take a couple of weeks, but you will get it, I promise. And then the RockyMountainMason.com has a subscription portal on the website, and I think the EsotericMason.com does too. So, and then my podcast is just Rocky Mountain Mason, and you can find that on any podcast provider. It's also, a link is also on the RockyMountainMason.com website. And thank you, Billy, for letting me say that.
So absolutely, because this is supposed to be, as much as we love talking with you, we want our listeners to be able to find some of the information you're sharing too, especially because you have quite a bit out there.
Thank you. And if you guys want to contribute at any time, by all means, please let me know, including all the listeners. I'm always looking to publish new authors at any time. I'm very happy to review stuff. And, we're looking at a journalistic standard. We don't necessarily require detailed citing. This is not an academic exercise, but a journalistic standard would be upheld.
All right, fantastic. And do you have your style guidelines for on your website for anybody who's interested?
So let's see. For the Rocky Mountain Mason, I don't know if there are style guide on the website. There is for the Knight Templar magazine, and that would translate very well for the most part to the other publications. So if you go to knightstemplar.org, the style guide should be right there on the homepage above the image of the current magazine. And basically what we do is we use the Quarry Project style, which is, Brent Morris, Chris Hodap's very laudable effort. Essentially, it's a modified Chicago style. If you're really interested in writing a lot, you should think about getting the Turabian Chicago Style Guide, which is a fantastic resource for how to cite and how to footnote and whatnot. Ultimately, what I care about most from the layout standpoint is that every article is sort of submitted in the same format. This is not ironclad. Obviously, we wouldn't reject it if it wasn't in this format, but it would be most helpful if a submission was Times New Roman, 12-point, double-spaced, No space between the paragraphs, just a single tab. And footnotes go on the outside of the publication. So after the period, or after the parenthesis, not inside, which is a common error.
Well, and with that, I know one thing we used to do is the quote of the week. I'm kind of bringing that back. So, Ben, I want to thank you for being our guest. And I'm going to end it with this quote from Marcus Aurelius from Meditations. And that is, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts.
Ooh,
Beautiful.
very true.
Yes. That's the source of all things, right? Thought precedes action. Action precedes habit. Habit precedes character. As my grandmother used to say, stand porter at the door of thought. I spent way too much time with a dumb waiter. Guys, thank you so much for this honor. I love you both. And I look forward to when we get to see each other soon, I hope.
Yes,
Absolutely.
hopefully we get to see you soon.
And Gabriel, did you want to go ahead and do the contact info?
Yes, folks. So you've heard Ben's contact info, and we'll go ahead and plug our lodge and podcast here. If you want to learn more, we are available at fortworthlodge.com or fortworth148.org. Our email is info148@fortworth148.org. And we are at fortworth148 on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And if you can't find us on those, then we are not on that platform. We do have a Facebook page. By this point in time, if I am predicting our release schedule accurately, Masonicon will have occurred already. So for everybody that did attend, thank you so much for attending and supporting this venture. It is always a powerful experience, and it's wonderful to gather together so many Masons here in Texas and from other jurisdictions that are passionate about learning and education. And we thank you for contributing to that shining light that has been this conference.
And we're planning for next year.
And we're already planning for next year. So if you want to get some more information for Masonicon 2023, you can find us at texasmasonicon.com. That's texasmasonicon.com. And I think that's it for the lodge plug.
All right, excellent. All right, so with that, we'll just sign off. This is Billy Hamilton signing off.
This is Gabe Yagish signing off.
This is Ben Williams. Thank you for having me.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine.
Nice to be in orbit.